This webinar is presented by STEM at Home, an initiative launched by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice. STEM Talks is a podcast that we do, and we also do this series of webinars where we're bringing issues and supplies and supports to address the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on learning. STEM Ecosystems will continue to bring you lively and informative conversations with thought leaders, parents, students, and others, all thinking about the pandemic and the need to continue this learning. STEM Families is a series of conversations and workshops intended to share practical tips, virtual experiments, and other concrete tools that families, even those with little time, few resources, and no STEM exposure or teaching experience, can use to engage their children's learning. STEM education leaders from across the country will offer a variety of activities for different age groups to engage students in STEM learning with resources that you have around the house. So here's the story. The Greater Cincinnati STEM Collaborative compiled this deck of family STEM cards in 2019 to support STEM learning at home. Each card has an activity that a family can do with very little instruction and with household materials that they should be able to find easily. And since March 19th, the GCSE is sharing the cards through social media to help provide parents, caregivers, educators, and more with STEM activities for their children and students during this period of extended time at home. GCSE also has an inventory of card decks available to ship to STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice and other partners through its donations website. Family STEM cards are developed to give families easy access to activities that they can do together. It's a really great option for those of you that want the voice and the choice, but also provide guided instruction that won't leave you feeling lost or overwhelmed. This is the key. Learning as a family should not be stressful. And with everything going on, we can imagine parents being bombarded with all types of digital tools and resources. These cards are not digital, and they'll get your family learning together and enjoying time with one another. So with us today, we have Mary Adams, Aaron Milligan, Emilee Armbruster. We're going to meet all of them a little more in a couple of seconds before they start. And today we have this design challenge. This is what we're asking you to ask your kids to think about. And we're lucky enough to have some kids who will be on camera with us working through this challenge as we're talking about it. And that design challenge is something that just left the screen, but it's about boats. There it is. What shape of a boat will hold the most pennies without sinking? So that's the question. How does the shape, how does the physical form of the boat impact its ability to bear weight? As always with these family challenges, it's really important that we tie them back to the next generation science standards. So the practice in this particular case is constructing explanations and designing solutions. Why does something in nature happen? These resources for families, this is not, okay, I think I'm introducing now. Sorry about that, everyone. Slightly confused. So I'd like to introduce our panelists really quickly and learn more from them as we go on and continue. So first up, we have Mary Adams. Mary's the executive director and the founder of GCSE. Her capstone contribution in a career that includes 27 years in IT at consumer products company Procter & Gamble. So Mary, a lot of us had a really unusual path that brought us to STEM. But when I think about STEM, I definitely don't think about Barbies. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it's a real simple little story. A couple years ago, we had a group of women in STEM who were passionate about supporting girls in STEM together. We were figuring out how to engage families and the community to support girls in STEMs, and we shared our stories. And I had this aha, eureka moment. Years and years and years ago on our family's ping pong table in the back half dusty corner of our basement, I had Barbies, but I really wasn't into playing with Barbies, but I was really into building a house for Barbie. And I know it wasn't well constructed. I know it wouldn't have stood any kind of weight or pressure test. It sure wasn't pretty, but I made this house out of cardboard boxes and cutouts from shoe boxes and windows, and I realized that was the beginning of my career in loving to create solutions to problems, which is what a STEM person does. Again, it wasn't very impressive as a house goes, but that's my genesis story for my STEM career.
You know, and I think that brings us back to these STEM cards themselves, right? When we work with our kids, we find a lot that the super fancy toys, do they want them? Totally, I want them too. But they also like the cardboard box. They like to cut things up. They like to take things apart. But putting some guidance and some structure around that can really be a powerful learning tool. We also have with us Erin Milligan. Erin is currently an educational consultant at Hamilton County Educational Service Center. She supports teachers in the areas of STEM education, focusing on best instructional practices and math education. Prior to her current position, Erin taught high school students for 11 years. You can see in the background there with Erin, two of her kids, or her two kids. Ellie, hi Ellie, who's 7 years old and in first grade. Ellie likes playing family, climbing trees, and playing with Lego. And Louie is 3 years old. Starts preschool in the fall, like sports of all kinds, wrestling and PJ Masks, which is my nephew's one of his favorites. So Erin, I know you're working from home like all of us are, or like most of us are, but unlike all of us, at least unlike me, I've got my wife downstairs who's with the kids right now. Unlike a lot of us, your husband is taking care of the community as a firefighter and a paramedic. So you're there alone a lot. How do you manage all of that? How do you keep that balanced?
Well, it's been really challenging for sure. So one of the things that we've really been enjoying doing are some of these design challenges. The kids have been doing all kinds of things, but it's been kind of nice because I've given them a challenge. They've been really excited about it, and they've worked on it for a good amount of time, and at least I can work a little bit during that time. So it's been fun, but it definitely has been challenging.
Yeah, it's this constant battle to keep them engaged, do our own jobs, keep them feeling safe and loved, and all of those things. And I'm excited about this conversation today because I'm hopeful, and I think that this is going to be a new opportunity for a lot of people to find something productive to keep their kids engaged while they can also get some other things done. Finally, with us today, we have Emilee Armbruster. Emilee's the creative force behind the family STEM cards. She earned her BS degree in early childhood education and previously served 2 years as an AmeriCorps Vista, including one with GCSE. Emilee, I can remember when I was in a school district, I was in a school district, two school districts for 16 years prior to this world. And one of them was really big into these white elephant gift exchanges every Christmas, which I hated because I'm a terrible humbug. And we had it every year, and I always seemed to come home with the worst thing. And I can remember this one time that I got this really terrible book of Christmas activities, and it went right in the donation pile. But somehow I feel like you might have done something different with that.
Yeah, so the whole idea behind these STEM cards kind of comes from one of those goofy things. It was a deck of Christmas activities you could do with kids, build a hat for Santa or decorate the house with candy cane stringed ornament type things. And so I looked at the cards for a few days and I was like, I have no idea what inspiration could be drawn from these. And then the idea for the cards just hit me like, well, what if we created one full of STEM activities? So that's kind of where the inspiration for the whole thing came from.
So I think we're going to throw your deck back up there so you can talk a little bit about the genesis of that. Here it comes.
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, these are actual physical decks of cards. So you can do a STEM activity and then you can actually go fish with them. They're numbered like a normal deck of cards would be. And it's very intentional because the idea was, how could you compile activities that made STEM seem less overwhelming for families and really was an easy introduction to them. So just like there's 4 suits in a normal card deck, there's 4 suits to our card deck, and it represents the 4 letters in STEM. So there's science specific cards, technology, and a lot of the technology cards are technology unplugged too. So if you don't have technology in your home, it's a great introduction. And then there's engineering and math. And then within the cards, the numbers that normally are important when you play Go Fish or one of those games actually relate to the age group that the card is most appropriate for, but they're pretty open activities so that you can have a lot of children of different ages kind of doing the same activities. So yeah, that's a quick intro to the cards. And, we talk a lot about STEM engagement best practices, and this is actually a resource we give to all of the educators in our network. And number 10 on there is kind of what we're doing today. these cards look at how can you help a family support their students or their child's journey in STEM, because families are so influential in getting kids excited and influenced in what they want to do later in life. So they really just go into that. And we're lucky enough to have Erin today with us, who's going to do one of the challenges with her kids in her house. And I'm excited that people get to see them.
Thanks, Emilee. I'm really appreciative of you. Ellie's teacher's done a great job of sending some stuff home, but it doesn't always work with a 3-year-old and having a first grader, trying to occupy them both at the same time. So like I said, the design challenges have been fun. We're going to be doing the penny boat challenge today. And if we can go to the next slide, this comes from it's one of the engineering cards. And this is geared towards, I think, 3rd through 5th graders. So I'm going to scale it down a little bit for my two. And if you have any comments or you're following along at home, definitely you can make this a little bit more challenging for upper level, or scale it down like we are today. If you're following along with us at home, the materials that you're going to need some foil, some kind of shallow bin where you can put the water in to test the penny boat. You're going to need some pennies and some water. And while you're gathering those materials together, we are going to follow the design process. And the older that kids get, you can be a little bit more sophisticated with the design process. We're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to just start out with talking about what the problem is. We're going to make a little plan. That plan, as kids get older, they can sketch it out or get a little bit more detailed, even with 3D modeling. But we're just going to maybe think about it in our head today. And then we'll build a model, we'll test it out and see if we can improve it, and then kind of talk about it and maybe go through the cycle again if we have time. So that's our plan for today.
And those of you who are listening from home, first of all, I'd really encourage you to grab those materials. It's a lot more fun if you kind of play along at home and try things out. And we'd love to have an opportunity to highlight some of those. If you email pictures later to info@stemecosystems.org, we can get those out on Twitter and some other things. But also, as you're listening to everyone talk today and learning, make sure that you're engaging with us in the chat box. Ask questions there. Some of those questions might just get answered right away by some of the other members of the team, but also we'll be asking some of those live, or asking you to ask those live. So as you're thinking about how you can apply these, please make sure to put those questions in there. Erin?
Okay, thanks. So I'm actually going to have Ellie read the design challenge. So Ellie, can you see that up there? Can you go ahead and read it for us? Read it really loud. Where it says design challenge, the white screen. Where it says construct. You have to read it loud.
Construct a boat from a
aluminum
foil square that can hold as many pennies as possible.
Okay, and then what's the question underneath there?
What shape of a boat would hold the most pennies without sinking?
Okay, so we're gonna make a boat out of an aluminum foil square. Hey Louie, do you know what a boat is?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
People float on.
People can float on it. Does it have to be people that float on a boat?
Yeah.
It does. Can something else float in a boat?
Yeah.
Like what?
A dolphin.
A dolphin, yeah. Sometimes dolphins are already in the water though, right? Hey, when you're in your bathtub, do you have any boats that you play with in there?
Mm-hmm.
What do you put in the boat?
People.
You put some people in. Do you ever put animals in there? Yeah. Today we're going to put pennies in our boat. We're going to make a boat out of foil. Can you go to the next slide, please? Maybe. Well, we'll keep going. So Ellie, can you tell me, and Louie, listen to Ellie's answer too so you can hear, what does it mean if something is floating?
Like if it's above water and something won't sink and it will float on something that floats.
It will stay above the water.
Yeah.
So we want to try to keep our boat so that it doesn't get a whole bunch of water inside of it. Okay. All right. So we've got some steps, and is that too little for you to read? Can you see it, Ellie?
I can see
Okay.
it.
Can you read the steps for us?
First, cut the foil into a square that is between 4 by 4 and 12 by 12.
Okay, stop for just a second. Do you see how it says like 4 and it has a little quotation mark
Yeah.
next to it? Do you know what those mean?
No.
Okay, those mean inches. So it's saying that has to be between 4 inches by 4 inches and 12 inches by 12 inches. So the smallest it can be is 4 by 4, and the largest is 12 by 12. That's what that's saying. So for you, I gave you the largest size, 12 by 12, and you can cut yours to be smaller. Louie, I already cut some different sizes for you so you can pick which one you want. Okay. And if you're at home working on this, 3rd grade and up should have started talking about area. So you might be able to link that conversation in a little bit and talking about how that changes area with different sizes. Okay, thanks, Ellie. Can you go to the next one?
Second, shape your foil square into a boat. You can create your own
Design.
or use a we are the
Specific.
picker up specific. We are the picker up. It's kind of
Yeah.
recipient will add a inspiration.
Thank you. Great. Just read the rest of the stuff.
Step 3. Fill your bin with only 4 inches.
Yeah, inches.
Inches of water. Step 4. Make a protection. How many pennies do you think the boat will hold? Step 5. Take turns placing 1 penny in the boat at a time until it sinks.
Okay. So, thank you, Ellie, for reading that. So, Louie, I have a question for you. Look, can you come up here for a minute? Look, I drew some, before we started, we were coloring some of these shapes. Can you show me which one's a square? Good job. So square has 4 sides, right? And there's something special about squares. Ellie, do you know what's special about squares, about the sides of the square?
They have points.
They do meet out, there's 4 points, you're right. What about the size of the lengths of the sides?
They're all the same size.
Yeah, they're all the same size. So Ellie, if you're gonna change your size, you can use the 12 by 12 that I gave you, but if you're gonna change it, they all have to be the same because we have to use a square. So the next thing that we have our steps, and the next thing we have to talk about is what are our limitations. And so I think that's on the next slide, but one of them is that it has to be a square piece of aluminum that we're using. And the other things we have to consider.
Mom, what else square?
What else is a square? We have, where are there? You tell me, where do you see squares? Is that a square? No, what is that?
A triangle.
Where's the triangle?
Right here.
That's a circle.
Can we use it?
You're gonna use the aluminum to make the boat. You're not allowed to use anything but a square.
Yeah, Aaron, I think it's important that we point out something that you're doing here. I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar are teachers and educators, but a lot aren't. One of the things that we're always encouraging people, and as you're working through, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is how do we deal with this situation? Normally, when we've got a first grader, we've got a room full of first graders. You've got a first grader and a 3-year-old. So how do we manage having kids other than, how do we manage having kids work together?
Are you asking me this?
I'm curious how our language has to change when we're thinking about talking to kids at different ages.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was thinking about this activity a little ahead of time, and I was trying to think about questions that I can ask Louie, but then Ellie knows a little bit more about, so she can elaborate on it. So for instance, with a square, he can recognize a square, but he doesn't know why it's a square yet. So trying to ask Ellie to give that explanation.
I also noticed that when you're talking to Ellie too, you're not doing a lot of kind of telling her things. You're sort of asking her questions to get her there. Why do you use that strategy?
So what we find in education, and this is true, I feel like for pretty much every content area, is that engagement is so much higher if you don't just tell someone the answer, but versus if you ask questions. And also it's more fun that way, you get to learn. So I try to, if I can lead towards, an answer by questioning, I think it works much better. I think it's more fun too.
Thank you. All right, so what's next, Ellie? What do we do next?
You ready? Are you ready to start building?
Yeah.
Well, what do we need to do before we just start jumping in? Do you think?
Think of what it's gonna look like.
Yes, think about what it's going to look like. So we have some pictures up there. Your boat can look like whatever you want it to look like, but you have to think about, we're going to try to put pennies, Philly's pennies, just one at a time, but how do they feel to you?
Heavy.
They're heavy. How are you going to create, you found one? How are you going to create a boat? Oh, thank you, buddy. That's pretty cool. How are you going to create a boat so they can hold some of these pennies? So I want you to start thinking about what your design might look like. Because Philly's pennies would. If you put just one in, is it very heavy?
Can I have? No.
If you put all these,
Can I have sides and like floors?
if you can build it out of a square piece of aluminum, you only get one piece. And yeah, you could. How could you make square? How could you make the sides?
Just one piece. This is three.
Well, in case you messed up, I get that. How can you, Ellie? How do you think you could make sides? What would you do to make sides of the boat?
Can you try it for us, Ellie? If you put sides on that boat, what?
Yeah, go ahead. See what you can do with that piece of aluminum.
Oh, look.
All right.
Give me side on it.
Okay. Here, I want you to. Which piece do you want to try to make a boat out of?
This one.
The big one. All right.
Fold it.
Okay. Try it. See, does that work? So think about kind of how you want it to look in your head, and then try to fold it. And you can use the new piece if you feel like it doesn't work.
I already used it.
Okay. Try something else. Louie, are you gonna leave that flat?
Don't start.
What do you think is gonna happen if you leave that flat, Louie?
No,
Yeah, go ahead. You
it
think
goes away.
what do you think? Well, look at, watch this piece. Did I drop that in there? And I start putting pennies on there. Here, we're gonna see. If you don't.
That's pretty cool, Ellie. I like how you're folding it up and making kind of a wall the whole way around.
Start putting pennies. Does the thing stay floating? Huh?
Yeah,
I think so.
I'll put some on.
Try and see. I don't know if you can see Louie's doing a little
Yes,
experiment
Mommy.
over here. Is it holding them?
Ah. It's beautiful. Oh, wow.
So while they're building, Emilee, I've got a question for you. One of the folks in the chat is asking, why do we start this out with the constraint of a square? What's the benefit of that, and when might we alter from that?
I chose a square because I thought it gave a little bit of support for the age group that the card is designed for. So, it gave them a starting place instead of being overwhelmed by, a rectangle that might be 2 feet wide or 2 feet long of aluminum foil. This gave them something a little smaller to work with and really get their ideas. But I think you could easily modify the activity to maybe say build a boat with a circle piece or a really big piece or a really small one. it's part of the designing of the cards is leaving them open so it can be adapted for all kinds of learners.
Yeah, I also think that another value to that is sometimes we have this concept of the paradox of choice, right? That we think that we want a million choices, we think kids want a million choices, but sometimes all those choices can lead to kind of stagnation. So a lot of times I at least think that there's some value in starting off with some constraints, and that absolutely, and you know, I don't want to speak for you and your cards, but my assumption would be that if you feel like expanding things, that's great. But it gives you a starting place with something you know you can support with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, you can do this activity a million times with the same set of kids. So it could be, you know, different challenges throughout it as well for the same set of learners.
Bigger.
Okay, you go get a bigger piece. Ellie's gonna test hers.
You are it.
All right, it's Ellie's turn. All right, we're
What's your
gonna.
prediction, Ellie? How many pennies do you think that'll hold?
Yeah, we need to make a prediction.
100.
You think it'll hold 100? Okay. Now let me ask you a question. Are you gonna put all the pennies in the same place, or what do you think? What's your strategy?
I like Peter.
Why would you do that?
So if I just put them all in one place, it'll make it heavier and heavier, so it'll pull down the aluminum, so it will. I give a monster.
Okay, so you think if you spread them out, it'll help?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's count them as you put them in. So Louie, help her count.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 16.
Ellie, you keep counting. Where are you at?
17, 14, 10,
I like how you're spreading them out.
40, 92.
While we're counting, go ahead and keep going, Ellie. I wanted to point out to those of you that are participating in the chat that in the chat also is Ted Fowler, who is a professor emeritus at the University of Cincinnati College of Education, Criminal Justice and Human Services. He works with STEM education outreach programs and collaborative efforts, and is a co-director of the Southwest Ohio Hub of the Ohio STEM Learning Network. So he's in there as part of this team, chatting with a lot of you and answering questions. So I wanted to make sure you knew who he was and that he's got the creds to really be digging in deep. What number are we up to, Ellie?
20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
Do you want a bit of water to try yours?
25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30.
So the boat is doing really well so far. Ellie, I want you to keep counting. While she's counting, Mary, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about the availability of these. I know I mentioned briefly at the top that these are printable and sendable. Are they purchasable? How can people access these tools? And Aaron, I'm going to temporarily mute you while we do that and while we count. Think you should be.
Thank you,
There
Jeremy. In the slide deck, I think it's a little bit further along. There's a slide with a lot of links on it and contact information. And I will say that all of us here in Greater Cincinnati would be delighted to have follow-up conversation about this, and our emails are there. So when we get to that slide, let's skip over that one. One more. Oh, well, a couple more. Keep going, keep going. There we go. Thank you. So Emilee was amazing and brilliant with this project, the whole idea and creating the cards, and they're just wonderful in person as a little card deck. We do have a way to get those out to people, but it's, you know, then you have to spend some money, and we're happy for you to donate and we can get you some cards. But we realized in these highly unusual times that it would be really valuable if we could create other ways for people to get the cards. And so that's exactly what we've done on our social feeds. And you can see our Facebook page and our Twitter's account there. We are publishing, and when I say we, it's Emilee. Emilee is publishing 2 cards a day, because we recognize in these crazy, crazy times, like maybe it's not helpful to get 100 resources a day, but maybe 2 cards a day out to our communities and friends and partners and family members is helpful. So 2 a day are coming out on social. On that Google Drive are all of the cards. We worked with our graphic designer to repurpose the card designs into a PDF format, and they are posted online, and you can download and print all of the cards from one place in that Google Drive.
So that link that Emilee just posted, that's the entire deck?
The entire deck. We've got it by topic, S, T, E, and M. And then there's one PDF has everything. And the reason we did that is we recognize, you know, lots of people do have a home computer, but also around the families that maybe don't have those resources are lots of printing partners. Perhaps school districts have a printing partner. I know locally Staples is coming in and helping our school district. They say, we'll print stuff for you, and you can hand them out to families. So those PDFs can be downloaded and printed by anyone that has ability to print. They can be distributed to families from there. As I said, we have physical decks, and they're great fun. We love them. But we wanted these resources to be available for free as well. So those are the 2 ways we are making them available for free.
That's great. And let's check in with Aaron again really quick and see what number we're on now. This boat is doing very well.
84.
In the 80s. That's really incredible. Emilee, do you have a suggested way that, so people print out the deck, they cut them out, they have them. What kinds of ways are people using them? Do they just kind of look through and pick? Do they choose them at random? What's the best way or a good way to start doing activities from these?
91, 92.
Oops.
There we go. My recommendation would always be to ask the children you're doing the activities with what they're interested in. You know, if they're more interested in science versus math, I would maybe start with a science card. And then, you know, based on their age range, you can pull out those cards and ask them, you know, which one would you like to do? The cards are also using household materials. So you should have a lot of this in your house. You know, everyone has pennies laying around the house. But that could also be another way you do it. You can look at, you know, what activity could we do today with the materials I have on hand? But the whole deck kind of has a bunch of different topics or ideas that relate to a lot of different interests that a kid might have. My personal favorite deck is probably the science one. I think a lot of the experiments are very wow, and they're just really exciting to see, I think, in the eyes of a kid.
And I think that someone, you or Mary, are going to share a couple more of those here in a minute. So I know that we all want to see those. How are you using these in the community? So when we think about the ecosystem project in general, the initiative in general, so this is your development. But if I'm a leader from one of the other ecosystems, what do you think is a good way to get these tools out to the community and use them as an interaction point? Mary?
So Jerry, let me make sure I've heard the question well. You're asking, what is a good way to get these resources into your community?
Yeah, if you were the creators, but if you were another community who just found out about these, what might you do in order to get them used?
Yeah, well, I think social is an amazing and wonderful tool. You could download the PDFs and share them in social. You could follow us in social and forward the daily feeds to your networks. We have a number of partners that are doing that now. If you're working with school districts, and Erin comes right into play again here, the whole idea of Erin participating in this webinar came because she and I were connecting on how can we support families during this time. She's with a county-based, here in Ohio, county-based educational organization. They work with school districts across our community, and she's actually created mechanisms to get these cards into a number of our school districts. Maybe she wants to tell us more about that, but she is bundling, she and her colleagues are bundling some of these cards into kits with materials to distribute at them to families. I heard through the TIES team that there's a library, I think out in Oregon, that is interested in getting some of these decks and making them available for loan. Each of us belong to networks. I think you can tap those networks and offer up these resources. And certainly follow us on social is a real easy way to get them on a daily feed.
Thank you, Mary. Linda Kekelis has some good questions in the chat, and I'd like to unmute her in a second and have her ask those to the team. But first, real quick, let's check in. I feel like we're at about $35 of pennies. Emilee, you are blowing away your prediction here. You're at 153 so far.
No, 155.
155. How does that make you feel about your boat?
Good.
Are you surprised? That makes you feel good. All right, well, keep on counting. We're excited to see how far that goes. Linda, are you there with us?
Hi, I am.
Linda?
The reason why I asked this question is I just know from research and some of the coaching I've done with groups around the country is that families are often a little bit scared of STEM and science activities because they feel like, they're not a scientist or not an engineer and don't know the answer, so they're hesitant to even try something. Or if they do, they freeze if they've asked the question. And I guess with some parents on the other end, if they are the experts, sometimes they feel like, having the right answer is what's most important in these activities. So it'd be great to just know, how do you support families beyond doing the activity with these sorts of ideas of building their confidence?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Mary on that in a second. I'll tell you while she's maybe kind of thinking about what she might share. I'm a really big believer that we have reached a point in society where teachers in general, but in this case, parents, have to stop pretending that they're experts in everything, number one, and assuming that they need to be experts in everything, number two. I think we've reached a point where with all of us, it's about learning together, and the teacher, the parent is that lead learner. It is okay to show it's not just okay, it's really powerful to show your students, to show your children that you don't know how to do something, you don't know the answer to something, and figure it out together. Mary, how would you address that from both ends of that equation?
Yeah, we think, is this Linda Kekelis from STEM Next? Oh, we revere you, lady. Thank you for being on this call. You're awesome. Yeah, we've done, the reason we did family STEM cards was because we really wanted to provide a resource. And Emilee's, it's her brainchild, her idea. But the reason it popped and that we invested to create the cards and print the cards and all of that, spent the money to do it, was because we saw this was a really accessible point for families to engage their students in fun learning and just have this positive experience together where they're growing with their parent. We recognize that, yeah, STEM can be intimidating, even if you did get into it by building Barbie houses. It is accessible. There's another slide in the master deck. I don't know, Jeremy, if now's a good time to show it, but there's actually a family STEM guide that we created a couple years ago. And then one of the partners in our network, and that's Battelle, go up back a little bit. Battelle, who leads the Ohio STEM Learning Network, actually picked up the guide. They did a little bit of repackaging, just a little bit, and they published it. And this is also online. My screen doesn't show the bottom of the URL. I don't know if anybody can adjust that up a bit. But there are these two online resources that we would suggest that are valuable for families. They're really a bit thick, but they're designed to help people, parents, learn more about STEM, why it's good for their children, what they can do to support their children, debunk some of the myths, and just provide a resource. So this, the one on the left is available in English and Spanish. We've got a link for you to use to get to it there. And then, as luck would have it, Battelle STEMX Network just published theirs like March 16th or something. So these are also resources designed for families and for partners who really want to support their families.
And Erin, I think you're muted, so I'm going to unmute you. I know that you do a lot of work through the ESC coaching and supporting teachers. So I guess the same question, when you're working with teachers, which is, I know not the same as parents, but when you're working with teachers and you're asking them to move outside their comfort zones and to teach things that they don't know how to do, how do you get them there? How do you get them comfortable exploring together with their students?
I think you were asking me. I'm sorry. It's really hard for me here. I'm actually gonna go in the other room while Ellie counts.
No problem. We're gonna wrap up the experiment anyway, and we'll jump back because after you answer this, I think we want to make sure that we have time to look at some of the other resources you guys are going to share. But yeah, so the question is, as you're working with teachers and helping them feel comfortable in teaching and supporting students in gaining knowledge that they themselves don't necessarily have, what does that look like? How do we get parents, how do we get teachers to feel that comfort level?
I think it's really, it takes a lot of practice, because I know when I first started in the classroom, I felt like I had to have all the answers. But the more that I let go of that, I found that I was able, sorry, just a second, I'll be right in there. Let me
This
answer.
is real life, don't apologize.
Okay. So anyways, the more that I kind of let go of that and I was able to discover with my students, they started trusting in the process more and feeling like they were empowered to find the answers. And so I try to encourage teachers to try it out, because I think it really just takes that jump to try.
I think that the important thing too that we want to get through to teachers and to parents is that even just beyond these specific STEM skills, we are constantly talking in this country, probably other countries too. We're constantly talking in this country about how our students need to learn how to stick with a problem, how to investigate a problem, how to find the answer to a solution, how to try and fail and try again. But then what we do as parents and as teachers is perfect this perfectly polished lesson, do it for them with no flaws. So they never see us do it. And kids learn these things through modeling. One of the biggest gifts we can give our kids is to fail in front of them and fail gracefully and use that as a learning opportunity. So I think these are really important things to be thinking about. I think it was Emilee who is going to talk next, although I'm not positive, about some of the other activities in the deck. So can we throw that deck back up there and learn a little more?
Yeah, so I think if we scroll down, we have 2 more options from the deck. And the first one would be the spaghetti tower. So it's probably an activity that some kids have done in classrooms. And the idea behind it is you have 15 minutes to build the tallest possible tower that also supports the weight of a marshmallow. So you're going for both height, but also function. And so you can see the different standards that aligns to in the NGSS. But on this card, there's some guiding questions that kind of help with some of the things we're talking about, when you don't really know how to guide a child through, building it, because they're like, oh, well, I'll just stick a spaghetti noodle straight up and it'll stand. It kind of helps get at some of the things they might be thinking in their mind and how you can guide them through the thought process. So, spaghetti noodles are super brittle. How might you be able to make them stronger? Some kids might say, well, maybe we can wrap some of the string around them. Maybe we can double up on the noodles. Maybe you'll use the tape as some sort of a support. you know, you don't have to ask all the questions right away. You can ask them along the way as you kind of see a kid get stuck. So that's something that's really interesting about the engineering cards, is it presents you with this challenge and then it gives you some guiding questions. And then there's also an ending question too. So, you know, for this one, it's looking at the design process that Aaron talked to us a little bit about. You know, this would be the reflect ending. What might you change? And so what is one thing you would want to change about your tower? You know, maybe a kid is going to say, I think I could make it taller next time. They might say, I think I need to make it stronger from the beginning. And so that's just an example. This one's for pre-K through second grade. You know, the younger your kids are, the more support and help they might need, which is why there's a few more guiding questions on this one. So then if we go to the next example of cards, this one is called Rainbow Celery. It's one of the science experiments that I think is kind of fun. So again, you can see the NGSS standards on the side. Again, it uses really simple household materials. So you need some celery, water, food coloring, and some glasses or jars. You know, if you don't typically have celery in your house, maybe this is one you look at it and you say, oh, this would be cool, but in a few days when we go to the grocery store, I'll be sure to pick up some celery. And then this, since it's a science one, gives you more kind of steps to follow. But then again, it always has an ending question. So once you go through the activity, and then this one, the longer you wait, the more exciting it becomes, because what the celery is going to do is it's going to soak up that food coloring, and the kids are going to be able to see the leaves of the celery change colors. So, you know, if you do it and then the kids go to bed and they wake up in the morning and the leaves are colored, it feels really magical. But there's an ending question to it. And then if you actually look on the bottom in that orange text, there's a tip on this one. So the tip for this one is making sure you're using enough food coloring so that the kids can actually see the experiment work. But then again, you could modify the activity and maybe you do some celery with only 4 food coloring drops, and then you do some of the celery with 8 food coloring drops, and you can see how the color might change and you can compare. So that's an extension you could do. But all of the cards either have this extra little bit of text, which might be another question that you could ask. It's a tip. It's a fun fact about, you know, what the card is talking about, or it dives a little deeper into the topic that it looks at. And then as a family, you might be able to go and explore that topic together and learn together. So that's just a nice little overview of some of other options of cards that we have in the deck. Yeah.
Well, it looks like we may have lost Jeremy. Can we go back to the family and see how they're doing?
Can everyone? Okay, we're back. We're at what are you at, Ellie?
255.
And we ran out of pennies. So I wasn't expecting her to have that many, so we were unprepared. But let's talk a little bit of Ellie about what do you think would happen if we made your boat smaller? Do you think it could hold that many pennies or less pennies? Why?
Like it could hold like 155, but not like 255 like the big boat.
Why do you think the big boat's holding so many?
Because it has sides and it's a lot stronger than little boats. Because big boats are like they're bigger and stronger.
What makes it stronger, do you think? Like if we made a boat half that size or a fourth of that size, what would make it stronger? Why would
wait, no, because it can hold a lot more pennies than the littler boat.
The littler one could now?
And then the bigger one.
Why though? What do you think?
I might need some more water because
I don't think you need more water.
yes, I do, because Screening.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me yet?
Oh, we can.
All right. Okay, good. The wonders of a world all online at once. The question that I was asking while you're continuing, I just want to make sure that I get to this before we run out of time. Emilee, Mary, Aaron, any of you, is first of all, what grade levels are these cards targeted towards? And also, if you could give us an example for parents of how you might take one of those experiments and alter them for younger grades and older grades.
So there's cards for one of the sections is, pre-K through second grade. There's cards for third through fifth grade. And then we call the last section sixth grade and up. It's probably more toward sixth through eighth grade, but you might be able to get into a little bit of ninth grade. So when I think of activities off the top of my head, some of them, we have technology activities that go through the ideas of like algorithms. And so those ones are really easy to tailor toward different ages based on how much information you give a child at first. So there's this activity, it's called Be My Guide. One person puts on a blindfold and a lot of trust, and the other person is supposed to guide them to a different room of the house. So if you're doing it with a younger kid, you might let the younger kid give you one direction at a time. So they might say, take 2 steps forward, and they'll see how far you get, and then be like, okay, take 2 more steps forward and then turn left. For an older kid, you might tell them, you have to give me every direction before I start moving. So they're gonna have to tell you, take 10 steps forward, turn right, take 4 more steps, turn left, take 6 more steps. Because when you're going through coding and programming, when you're younger, some of the things are easier. They set up these things so you can kind of see why you give information, whereas an older kid, you can really think through that process a little bit more. So that could be an activity that you can tailor to, your 5-year-old, but you can also tailor it to like the 4th grader in your home.
I think one of the things that we talked about, and actually the 4 of us talked about yesterday, 5 of us talked about yesterday, is that it's really rare, frankly, that there's an activity like this, that there's not a way to bring it down to the level of a 3-year-old and up to the level of a high school AP student. There are always questions that can deepen and ways that we can break those questions down. And that's something that I think there's a lot of value and power in the ecosystems potentially during this time to help their local communities think about those types of skills and how parents and teachers can adapt the resources that they have access to any age of student. Listen, everyone, these are really a great resource. We showed up on the slide, and it's been in the chat, and it's up on STEMecosystemz.org, how you can access these tools. I printed them out while we were sitting here, so I haven't gone to look at them yet, but I sent the PDF downstairs and printed them to use with my kids later. We're really happy and excited to have this resource available to everyone. So first of all, thank you to everyone at the ecosystem at GCSC. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Emilee. Thank you, Aaron. And in particular, thank you, Louie and Ellie. We really appreciate the time and the guts, frankly, that it takes to not only put your kids online, but put your kids online when you know that things aren't going to go perfectly. We thought it was important that everybody could see this happen live and see that it never works out the way it does on paper. It's not about that, right? It's about just having these exciting experiences with our kids, keeping education and thinking alive for them while connecting with them. This webinar was presented by STEM at Home, an initiative launched by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice. STEM Ecosystems will continue to bring you lively and informative conversations with thought leaders, parents, students, and others, all thinking about the pandemic and the need for STEM learning. You can continue to follow us on STEMecosystemz.org, on Twitter, on Facebook, where you'll hear more about the upcoming sessions. I know that we have 1 or 2 coming up very soon. If we could throw that deck up really quickly. So next week, we have a really, really critical conversation. This is not a child experiment kind of conversation. This is a very important conversation about connecting the unconnected. As you are all aware, because we've been hearing from all of you, the digital divide is not only very real prior to this COVID epidemic, but it is far more apparent that now we have students all learning from home, and many of them don't have access to the learning that they need. So we'll have experts from around the country with us on an informative panel to talk not only about what the issue is, but what you as parents and as leaders can do to advocate to fix this issue and to change it. Next week on our family series, we'll have a STEM Families Virtual Lab exploring sound with NASA, with our friends and partners at NASA. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to learn some new great activities. We hope to see you all there, and continue with the great work that you're doing, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.